Welcome to the Judaism From Within podcast. My name is Similana. The point and purpose of these discussions is to give an insight or a perspective from the teachings of Rav Hirsch, someone whose ideas and worldview I both love to teach and find personally inspiring. I hope you enjoy.
To be honest with you, I approach this topic with a huge amount of apprehension, because this is the most or one of the most difficult to understand topics in the entirety of the Bible. But more than that, the approach I'm going to take, or the approach I'm going to attempt to explain, is not an easy one. But on top of that, the approach I'm going to take is subtle, and in a complex, sensitive topic, such as the Akedah, I hope I do it justice. But the value and the fruits that we'll reap and the tools that we'll walk away with in looking at Judaism or looking at the world through the lenses Judaism offers to us, I personally found really wrapped together so much of what I understand about Judaism and so much about how Judaism interacts with the world and the language that Judaism uses throughout the Bible. It almost gives us a key. It almost gives us a framework to look at everything else through. So I feel it is a worthy journey to go on. So let us begin. Why is this a difficult topic? Well, because quite simply it stands against everything Judaism has thus far been pushing us along. The call to Abraham to be a blessing to the world, to practice justice, righteousness, all this language we find emotive. We find this is a mission that we as people want to go on. How we are to be a blessing, become a blessing, and how we see Avram act with such kindness, such benevolence. And God approaches this man to be his paragon of the mission to the world. But it's more than that. So steeped is Avram in the truth and the good, he stands up and questions God when God is about to destroy a nation, where God is about to destroy the evil. Avram asks, but perhaps there are righteous people there, in which case how could you possibly do what you're doing? This connection to people, this embodiment of all that is noble and good, this very man goes on a journey to sacrifice his son. Now, quite simply, there are two ways you can deal with this event. On the one hand, you can tackle it, you can deal with it, you can feel that tension and try and understand what's going on. Because this event is, once again, held up in Jewish history and in Jewish liturgy as being a monumentous, epic event in the Jewish people's lives. We talk about it every morning. We talk about it during the high holidays. And however difficult it may be to be in the state of tension and deal with it, because we know what has come before, what has come after, we recognize that this event is supposed to bring something out, however hard it is to come to grips with. But once again, that is characteristic of the religious experience. It isn't necessarily easy on the ground or easy conceptually. So that is the route Rav Hirsch takes. But at the same time, there is another route that a person can go down, and this Rav Hirsch very much is countering. And this approach appears in many different ways throughout history. And the approach is an easy one. It's retreating from the tension, feeling the tension and walking away and saying, okay, I hear the tension that's happening here, but I don't want to deal with it. I'll just say Avram failed. Avram failed in this mission. He should have not acquiesced to God's request. He should have said no. Now we have to appreciate why this is attractive. Once again, there's a tension. We don't like tension. Tension is painful. So you retreat from the tension and simply say that he failed, in which case you no longer have the tension. But like all truly profound thinkers, their genius and their creativity stems from tension. Tension is difficult. Tension is painful, but that is where creativity rises up. So that's what we're going to do. We are going to experience this tension, recognize that we have to appreciate that potentially there's a key that is missing here, and then see where the journey takes us. So let us frame the situation. Let us frame the event. We have Avram and Yitzchak very much going together. We have an elderly man and a 37-year-old man together going on this mission. Now, there are of course many other specifics that give rise to Rav Hirsch's explanation in terms of language of the Psukim, but I'm going to put those to one side. Because the key component here not only answers the question that we're dealing with in terms of the Akedah, but answers so much more. Rav Hirsch looks at the Akedah and looks at the critiques that people give it because they come into the story with a specific conception of God in mind. They look at the idea's fear of God, or what we call Yiras Hashem, as simple dog-like obedience, the simple listening to God because he said so, but at the same time forgetting the character or the concept or what we mean by God. Because even though this is a difficult scenario to get to grips with, but at the same time you can't forget what we mean by God in the process. Because if you forget what we mean by God and you just take it in a vacuum, because if you do that, all you're left with is a very powerful being making a demand of a mortal. In which case, yes, you say no. But the problem is, in the process of letting that in through the back door, you are talking about a pagan god. When the Jewish people said God, from Rav Hirsch's point of view, they mean what embodies the ethical, what embodies the moral life, what embodies true benevolence. Monotheism to the Jewish people didn't simply mean another being that makes demands of us, that needs to satiate itself with our sacrifices. When the Jewish people said monotheism, they mean that the good and this striving that humanity is on is embodied in one idea, in one concept, in one something that is akin to a personality. The universal moral will of existence is what we're calling HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God. That idea is all one and the same. So in which case, if we reframe it in this way, well, once again, what do we have making this demand of Avraham? That is the thing that is making this demand of Avraham. So the way Rav Hirsch looks at it is that Avraham was put to the ultimate test. If we de-theologize the language, Avraham was told by the ultimate good to follow me even when you don't understand it. As a message to humanity, as a message to the Jewish people that the good isn't always that which is sweet. The good isn't always that which is beautiful. Sometimes the good might be difficult. The sacrifice you have to make for that which is right may be painful. The paradoxical nature of the command to Avraham was that he has to go on this journey, and the thing that asking him to do the unthinkable was the thing that could only tell him to do the most good. So in essence, he was told to go against everything that he understood in the pursuit of doing the good, in the pursuit of doing that which was morally right, even though he didn't see it at the time, how it came to the good. That was the message to Avram and to his descendants. And how does this story end? This story ends with an angel stopping him and saying that God doesn't demand this of you. And Rav Hirsch explains that, of course, only an angel was necessary to tell him to stop. To tell him to go on this impossible mission, that had to be clarity from the point of view of God. That's the only way Avram would ever be able to go on this mission. But to be told to stop? Well, this fit in with everything he knew about the divine. This fit in with everything he knew about the God that had put him first on that moral mission to humanity. So to clarify, if it had been anything else but complete clarity via communication with God, whatever that means, there is no way Avram would have acquiesced. There is no way Avram would have gone on that journey, unless, for whatever reason, he was completely sure that the one and the same being, the one and the same God on high, was calling upon him on this mission. But to stop from this mission? This only took an angel. Something that fit into what he understood and what was expecting. So, to recap, if you look at this story and you let slip in the back door and replace God with some form of pagan god, but you're using the same language, you're still calling him God, but you forget what you mean by that term, and you replace it with some form of deity that's simply making demands, a tyrannical dictator or a divine dictator, then yes, there is a serious absurdity to this entire story. But if we remain consistent in Jewish theology of what we mean by God, and we make the assumption that Avram was aware of this as well, rather than taking the assumption that Avram Avinu was also looking at God as this divine dictator, if we can do the charity to assume that he was also looking at God in the consistent way that he had been doing throughout the Bible so far, then we have our answer to our question. We have our answer to why Avram would go on this mission and still be held as the paragon of morality, as the paragon of loving kindness to the Jewish people. And we can remain consistent. So, That's that first point. But that component of how we approach God also allows us to answer another question. Now, not many people have this question, because it stems from a thinker called Immanuel Kant, a Prussian-German philosopher in the 17th century, whose work was massively influential on the intellectuals of his time and the following centuries, specifically on his works on the limits of knowledge and metaphysics. But when it came to his work on ethics, this is where the Jewish people and the followers of Kant had tension. And in the time of Rav Hirsch, he battled with this with the reformers of his time. The question Immanuel Kant put to the religious was that to truly be moral, it must be coming from the personal autonomy of the individual. It cannot be imposed from outside, what's called heteronomy. It has to be autonomous from the individual. To be told what to do, you are no longer truly acting moral because you are just conceding to the demand of something else, something more powerful. Even if the demander is God, it doesn't change the situation. You are not being moral unless it comes from you. So be it coming for a hope of reward or fear of punishment or simply the obeying of the divine will, you can either be religious or you can be moral. You cannot be both. And at its key, moral self-legislation is the only way to truly be a moral human being. But if we keep in mind Rav Hirsch's description of the Akedah, we see how Judaism avoids this dilemma. Because when we talk about God, what we mean by that as well is his character as the highest moral being. So the initial decision to follow Judaism is an initial decision to follow the moral law. It is the initial decision to go down the road of being a moral person. How specific Jewish thought and Jewish law and Jewish ritual leads to that is a different discussion. But the initial decision to go on that journey, that itself is moral autonomy, is the decision from the individual rising up to grasp hold of the moral mission. So to recap our 2 points, we stood against the idea that the Akedah was a moral failing on Avram's part, and we reframed it in a truly Jewish sense of what we mean by God remaining consistent throughout the Bible. And then we showed how this way of looking at the world through the lens of the Akedah opens up the door to understanding another critique that is leveled against Judaism as being simply blind obedience to a higher power. Because no, the initial decision to go on that mission is the truest expression of moral autonomy of the individual. Thank you very much for listening and have a wonderful Shabbos.